We just start with the words thank you, which have such power to them, for the work that you've done this past year. Before I say a couple words, I want to start by saying there's a saying in the Native community: when you lose an elder, you lose a library. And the tragic passing of Julia Bogany this past month is a reminder of how true that is. Not only as a Tongva elder who was preserving language and helping us establish an Indigenous Peoples Day here, her engaging presence in the Civic Memory Working Group, her lifelong project was to try to take the invisible and to make it visible. And she might not be visible in this grouping here today, but she is absolutely not invisible. If we can't see her literally, we all see her right now in this, what you have helped produce, what we have produced in our city, and in the ways that her lightness of spirit that drew people to her always. And there's a beautiful adjourning tribute that Councilmember O'Farrell did to her, but I just want to take a moment to pause and to remember and to thank her. May her memory be a blessing. There's a story that's one of my favorite, by my favorite author, Jorge Luis Borges, and it's called Funes el Memorioso, which translates kind of badly in English, Funes or Funes the Memorious. And it's the story narrated presumably by Borges of a rural boy who he once meets, who's able to tell him the time without looking at a watch. And then he visits later after he's heard that he's been thrown off of a horse and hit his head. And apparently the damage that happened when he got thrown by the horse has given him this ability to remember everything. Every detail of every day, of every moment, of every place he's been, of everything he's seen is as vibrant and alive as memories from years ago. And in many ways, it's a curse as well as a gift. He organizes all the numbers that exist by giving them each unique names, not realizing the point of a numerical system is to simplify numbers and to understand them. He, closes his eyes and can't remember what time of day it is because every moment of that day is still as vibrant as the one from a second ago. And in the end, Borges describes this man who both knows the details of everything, but can't find the abstractions of anything. He can't make meaning of it. It becomes this curse. And in many ways, it's, to me, I was thinking about this book and this project, which was very near and dear to my heart as an Angelino, not just as your mayor, but as an Angelino, as somebody who has kind of been obsessed with memory and its meanings for my whole life. That to remember, we need to both have the details and the abstraction that comes from those details. That so often, history, by definition, we lose the details. There's nobody to ask, there's no physical evidence, nobody wrote it down, and we can only think what happened here for tens of thousands of years, for instance, before Spanish settlers came. But the abstractions are just as important as the details, because you can collect all the things, you can go through all of the records, you can look at all of the memories that people have, but if you make no meaning of it, then what's the point? So it's both about memory and meaning. It's about the details and the abstraction, something that Funes never could do. And this group has been extraordinary because it has done both. It has looked at the way that we can find those details before they are lost, remember and teach those details, but also stitch them together and to try to offer pathways for meaning, for understanding, for larger lessons, and for those to be passed on. Because a city in the end is an organic entity, a place that people can be lucky enough to be born in, like myself, smart enough to move to, like many of you. But once you're here, you're a part of that organism. And this charge that this working group had to compile not just the memories, but the meaning, and from that meaning, action, so that we can continue that cycle of bringing together what has happened and how it affects us and how it influences us, to make sure in a city that is so often whitewashed its history or taken the outside cliche that we don't have one. This runs completely counter to that. And I want to thank Christopher Hawthorne for his extraordinary work in convening and curating all of this, but also John Szabo, Michael Holland, Danielle Brazil, and so many members of the city family that have come together to give voice to the work that you have done and the perspectives you have each brought. I think this is also informing the work that we'll do moving forward from this, the most terrible year of our lives, of how do we remember this year? It's too early to even think and to know that. I was talking with a member of the governor's cabinet about throughout the state, after World War II, victory gardens. What will our victory gardens be coming out of COVID-19? How will we mark and remember? For those of us who have lost family members and loved ones, what do we do? And I think that you have put an amazing lattice work down that we can hang ideas and process on for communities to determine that and a city to determine that together, to look at the unequal toll that the pandemic took in causing physical and material, emotional, economic distress. And the other things that will come out of this that are material, that we're excited about, whether it's the support to memorial of the victims of the largest lynching in American history, the 1871 anti-Chinese massacre, which when you started, if you're Asian American or Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, every day has the resonance of this, but even more so in the last couple months and from the beginning of this pandemic, quite frankly, when that odious vein of anti-Asian xenophobia has reared its head and come back alive with even more strength. So the next steps that you put here, all 18 of them, let me just start by endorsing, because that was the point of this work group, was to put down these memories and to give people a map way in, but also to provide us a map way out of this, and to create a post of a city historian, for instance, to work side by side with a city archivist that was more about the documenting of history. Now a city historian can be about the meaning of history. The strong way in which the base of this, in many ways the heart of this, is about our native community and our native city as well. And we're really excited to launch the conversations, the initiatives, and awareness about this. And the last thing I'll say before opening up to each of you to speak is I don't see this as a side project. I see this as a central prism through which we are refracting our city's light, and through which our future light should refract through moving forward. That, in other words, you don't just have to be working at cultural affairs or the library to look at what your role will be. I see AP here, for instance. Rec and Parks has so much land that is holy land, both in what it will be, what it is, and what it has been. And so how we spur those conversations and that understanding, and the people who have been written out and can be written in, and the folks who can be the history makers, I think we will look forward to having a city family that now owns this collectively, and hopefully a wider city that feels that ownership as well. So this is much more than about building memorials. It's about understanding memory, and it's about finding each of those details and the abstractions that give us both. So thank you, and with that, let me toss it over to Christopher, but let me just say job well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for those thoughts and those comments and the support that you provided this project since you first helped convene the group in November of 2019. Before we hear from some members of the group, and we're really pleased to have some of the most instrumental voices in this effort with us today to celebrate the launch, I want to just quickly talk about how this came together. And again, as the mayor said, where we go from here. But I do want to join the mayor in remembering our friend Julia Bogany, who is such a key voice in this, and who will be deeply missed. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comments in her memory. We're here to mark the release of this report and recommendations, which takes the form of a print volume and a website, both designed by the terrific LA firm Polymode, and we'll hear from Silas Monroe of Polymode in just a minute. And the website has a collection of these photographs and essays and entries that this group produced over the course of about 18 months. As I mentioned, the roots of this go back to conversations I had with the mayor about the 1871 anti-Chinese massacre and other moments from our history, that particularly dark ones, fraught ones, that we had not engaged with as honestly as we might. We met first in November of 2019, as I mentioned, in City Hall, and then again in February when this picture was taken on the third floor of City Hall in the press room before the pandemic struck. And then we broke into subcommittees and did work virtually, of course, as we all did across 2020. But 2020 was a year, as the mayor mentioned, that when it seemed as though the ground was shifting beneath our feet on a daily basis. Even before the pandemic struck, we saw this amazing response to the death of Kobe Bryant, which was a kind of fascinating case study for all of us in kind of populist, ad hoc, organic commemoration memorials that sprung up in and around Staples Center in particular. And of course, after the death of George Floyd, we saw the Black Lives Matter protests, marches across the city, calls for social justice, and a number of memorials to George Floyd himself, of course, in areas around the city. And we incorporated that material to the degree that we could in the report, looking in some detail at this Kobe memorial with fantastic photographs by Alex Welsh. And we're very pleased to be able to include in the book an essay by Tyree Boyd-Pates, and a curator at the Autry, who has been spearheading the Autry's efforts to commemorate and collect material related to those social justice protests, as well as the pandemic itself across 2020. But of course, the anchor of this work is really reaching back to these moments in Los Angeles history. Again, some of them fraught or complicated, that even many Angelenos remain unaware of. This is a photograph of Mexican repatriation from 1932, which is one of those events. We brought together experts in a number of fields to talk about, again, some of those thornier issues, like the legacies of Father Sarah, for example, in a number of roundtable conversations and interviews, which are included in both the book and on the website. And as the mayor mentioned, we condensed and compiled all of that material into 18 key recommendations organized by theme. And I want to talk a little bit about the first one, because the first recommendation is kind of overarching or guiding recommendation for the rest of the recommendations that follow. And it really suggests that we take all the material in the report out to communities across 2021 to get feedback, to get input, to get guidance, to get more wisdom from the communities across Los Angeles. And that's what we plan to do. We've added an events page to the website, which will announce those conversations, which we expect will be large and small across the city, and also serve as an archive for the ones that we've held. So keep your eye out for that. And another one, as the mayor mentioned, I'm very happy to hear his support for this idea of commemorating and really marking with a memorial of some kind the anti-Chinese massacre of 1871, particularly as we look ahead to the 100th anniversary in October. And we included material on that event, which continues to be, as you heard, a stain on the city's history in the report, including a list of victims and perpetrators. So as we move ahead, I just want to leave you with some key themes for the conversation. These were ideas that we kept coming back to as a group. One, we heard again and again from our partners in this effort that the city has acted as a gatekeeper in terms of civic memory, and might better think of its role as a facilitator to allow and support expressions of civic memory in many forms across the city. Second, that we think of the book really not as an instruction manual or as a set of designs per se. We're not designing memorials. We're not naming structures that need to be taken down. It's really meant to be a kind of guidebook to help frame decisions and equitable processes related to these important issues. We're very proud next of the group that we brought together in terms of their expertise across a whole variety of backgrounds, but we also proceed with a great degree of humility, and we don't presume to have the final word on any of these complex subjects. And again, to circle back to that first recommendation, the overarching goal is to take this report on the road, as it were, out to communities across this year for feedback and to move this work forward. And again, it's important to underscore we have work ahead. We're very proud of the work we've done over these 18 months, but we do have work ahead. So thank you so much. I will leave it there, and then I'm very pleased that we're joined by a number of key members of the working group, and I want to ask each of them to introduce themselves in turn and talk just briefly about the role that they played in the Civic Memory Working Group. And we'll start with Rostin Wu.
Thanks, Christopher. So my name is Rostin Wu. I'm an artist and a designer, and I co-chaired the subcommittee that was dedicated to process what our public process as a city could look like. Our recommendations from that subcommittee flow from the recognition that so many monuments are coming down around the country for a reason, and that's that they represent visions of empire, state violence, and white supremacy that just simply cannot hold, and that's a good thing. And we believe that civic memory is important mostly because of the way that it lays the groundwork for civic imagination today, for the present. And there's never going to be a singular agreed upon past, so we should do what we can to foster more public memory, not less, more difficult conversations and more engagement. Presently, as Christopher said, the city is seen mostly as a gatekeeper who gets to gift a monument on public land or receive historic designation feels opaque at best to nearly everyone. So these programs should be reconfigured to be public facing, to be generative, inclusive, participatory, and even joyful. And they should be focused on providing resources for communities to develop projects that are meaningful to them. We also recognize that the city is likely to always be risk averse. By its nature, it won't be an effective driver of projects that deal with the true complicated and difficult nature of our history. And watered down, fixed and fearful forms of historic commemoration do those histories a deep disservice. Truly successful memorials have to be deeply connected to other civic processes, to programming, to education, and most importantly, to systems of redress and restitution, to reparations. For example, there can't be a meaningful city monument to victims of police violence without the other forms of healing and repair. The city can convene and facilitate and provide resources, but the development of memorials and programs would be most effectively led by individuals and organizations with a freer hand. There are, however, some immediate changes that the city can make to its own existing practices. At a bare minimum, it seems like things like processes for naming or formal historic recognition should be made legible and transparent to everyday residents of the city, but they should also be made financially and logistically accessible to communities with fewer resources to pursue them. And they should be redesigned to collect and make accessible the incredible testimony that they do surface. We should also adopt a standard accession period for public art, after which it is reevaluated or deaccessioned. Civic memory shouldn't be siloed just into the art department, but woven into other practices of the city, staff trainings, the zoning code, land title. So those are a few of many specific recommendations that can be found in the report. A quick summary from our subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rostin. And we'll go next to Natalie Molina. Professor Molina.
Thank you. My name is Natalie Molina. I'm a professor of American Studies and Ethnicity at USC. I'm a third-generation Angelino, born and raised in Echo Park. I was part of the Labor Committee as well as the Whiteness and Civic Memory Committee. And our roundtable discussion took up a topic fundamental to LA's understanding of its own history, yet in many ways under-scrutinized outside of universities. The ways that whiteness as a racial category and as a mark of privilege or elite status has been constructed, defined, reshaped, taken advantage of, and alighted in Southern California as the region has grown. And I have to say, even as someone who led this discussion, studies this, just being part of this group has made me look at the city differently. I went on a hike in Griffith Park this past weekend, thinking about who was Griffith? How did he get that land? And then going down Los Feliz and making a right at the Mulholland water fountain and thinking, how do people understand these fountains? I'm very excited about how this committee will reinvigorate our understanding of Los Angeles's history as we move forward. And I'm also very proud that we began this work before the COVID-19 pandemic, before calls for social justice seen in protests this past summer. I'm proud to be a part of a group that contributes to thinking about how our past might inform our future as we move forward in these momentous times.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And next, I'd like to introduce Silas Monroe, who is of the design firm Polymode, which has led the design work both, as I mentioned, in the print volume and on the website. It has been such a pleasure to work with Silas and his team, primarily, or not least, I should say, because he and his team have been so interested in thinking about ways that the design of this project might underscore the themes that you've already heard about. It's such a rare pleasure to work with a designer who is thinking across all of those levels, and that is absolutely true of Silas. Silas.
Thanks, Christopher. I'm going to share my screen to give a little bit of visual. I know Christopher showed the report, and the feeling's mutual, Christopher. We really enjoyed collaborating with you and your team, and just all the thought and care that the working group put into their materials really was inspiring to us as a studio. And so the printed report was designed by Polymode, but for the website, we collaborated with Happening Studio, who are based in both LA and Tokyo. We just wanted to show you a little bit of like the context of other work that we do. We're really interested in, I was really struck by Mr. Mayer, what you were saying about abstraction and detail. And I feel like design is all about that. It's about making meaning in a spectrum between those two places. And for us, we're really interested in also highlighting and celebrating marginalized voices through the power of design. And polymodal, we're very interested in both sort of this idea of like many ways of working and in many forms. And I feel like the past due report had that sort of, how do you straddle between different, both the print and the digital aspects and get them to use the affordances of their design. This is some of the work of Happening, who are our collaborators in Tokyo, just so you can see some of their work. And I particularly want to talk about the typography that we use for the printed and digital report and its connection to Los Angeles and some of the notions of whiteness and visibility and invisibility. And the primary type is a typeface called Marie of Los Angeles, which was designed by Roberto Rodriguez. And he was inspired, he's a native Angelino, and he's inspired by the various murals of the Virgin Guadalupe across the city. And as part of his research, he found this 1811 battle flag of the Mexican revolutionary Miguel Hidalgo Bandera. And the type on that became his principal inspiration for this type that reflected his home city. And we paired Roberto's Mola typeface with two typefaces by Greg Lindy, who's also a Los Angeles designer who was a mentor of Roberto and taught him type design. And so you have this multi-generational collective of type designers. And we used Greg Lindy's Cuenga, which has this sort of warm humanist serif typeface that is connected to some of the kind of organic feeling of making your way through Los Angeles via car. And then another one of Greg's typefaces, Fabrica, which is a sans serif type that also has structure and warmth. And I think for us, the typographic palette of these three different typefaces is a bit of a metaphor of the multiplicity of Los Angeles and the diversity of the people that live here, as well as the complexity and sophistication of the ideas represented in the report. A big part of the report was also maps that were commissioned by Scott Reinhardt, who is also a data visualization journalist for the New York Times. And as we were mapping Los Angeles and tying the themes of the report of marking, monument, there was also discussions of kind of the layers of the city, both cultural, geographic, and physical, that we then translated into the typographic layouts, and really in the report and the website tried to create this feeling of the horizontality and beast as we get in Los Angeles, both when we think of sort of being in the car, but also the landscape or the horizon. And of course, if you want to look deeper, the website will drop a link into the chat, is now live, where you can look. This is the homepage where you're presented with a grid of these swatches from the report that come in a random order. Is this way of like entering in any point. But you can also look in a sort of linear list way the report is organized. And there's also a map mode. So you could also enter through a geographic location, and there are ties and connections between the digital map points and then the report articles. So just thank you for your time and attention. We're excited to hear feedback as you explore the two forms of the report.
Thank you so much, Silas. And again, URL for that website, civicmemory.la, and live as of today. I'll turn next to another key voice in these discussions, William Devall. Bill.
Thank you, Christopher. My name is Bill Devall. I'm director of the Huntington USC Institute on California in the West, which is a collaborative research, teaching, and public-facing entity focused on the history and culture of the American West between USC's Dornsife College and the Huntington Library. This work we've done, I am just so thrilled by this report. The work we do in our academic life with the institute that I direct is fundamentally public-facing. We're trying to bring academic insights into dialogue with as many and as different public audiences as we can draw together. This work on past due was publicly immersed, and the test of it will be its reception and the dialogues it creates in the public about our pasts in Southern California. I've never worked on something like this before that was so exciting and challenging and thrilling to make the connections across so many disciplines with scholars, architects, planners, city officials, curators, archivists, journalists, etc. And I think what we've done is together, not only I think we can be justifiably proud of the product, but we're just initiating the conversations now. It doesn't feel as much as a finish line as it does as a starting point to me. I want to acknowledge the brilliant leadership of Christopher Hawthorne, who led us with great creativity and imagination, with a light but subtle and firm touch on the objectives. It was really a pleasure. And I want to also acknowledge the many intellectual and other kinds of connections made between all of us in speaking for myself, and I suspect speaking for everyone that served on this committee. I'm looking forward to continuing the work. I'm looking forward to the reception it receives, the questions it provokes, and the things we can learn from people who weren't part of this group. Because as Christopher noted, this is not a group that was meant to be at all insular. We had work to do and we got it done, and it's been launched as of today. But now, in many respects, the more creative and imaginative work can begin and ensue from voices we haven't heard yet. So a great privilege. It's wonderful to bring the past into dialogues about our present so that we can collectively work towards a better future. And I'm really gratified to have been part of it.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate that. And next, Gail Canard, another key member and a key colleague and fantastic collaborator with me since I've joined the mayor's office on any number of projects. And it was such a pleasure to have her in this one. Gail.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I want to echo what Bill just said and what everyone has said about appreciative of what you've done, Christopher. And I also, I don't know if this is said before, I wanted to thank you, Mayor, for your leadership in this and getting out and ahead of the issue when it was coming up a couple years ago. So I really appreciate your leadership on this. Because what I've learned to understand is this is about more than what our task was actually. I was on the Indigenous committee we were talking about Indigenous issues, and we've made recommendations in the report about that. Also decolonization, all those issues around the conquest of our country and our city, basically, and how we have been recipients of that. Some people have been triumphant in those encounters and others have not. But on the other hand, the most of us, all of us who have been othered, we are also resilient. We are traumatized, and no more clearly now than what's going on in Minneapolis. We're traumatized and we're re-traumatized. But on the other hand, we're also resilient. We are resilient and we are still here. And if anything comes out of this of good, and I hope that a lot will, is that we're beginning to see that we need to switch the narrative, switch it, and tell everybody's story. And it's not just about correcting the historical record, in my mind. It's also about changing our culture and how we value each other, because we have all so much to give to each other, and we will be so much stronger when we do that. So if we understand that this is more than about just telling the history, this is also about claiming human dignity for our city and ourselves. And I think coming out of it, we will be stronger. I'm encouraged. The times that we're in now, these extraordinary times, give us many opportunities. And I think we have the opportunity now to seize it. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Gail. Really appreciate your leadership in this work and those words today. Finally, to last but not least, to Joan Weinstein from the Getty Foundation. The partnership between ICW and the Getty Foundation is really the engine that has driven a lot of this. Joan.
Thank you, Christopher. The Getty is really extremely proud that we could support ICW to publish the working group's report in print and online, extending its impact. And some of you may know that last week, the Getty Conservation Institute, which is our sister program at the Getty, announced the African American Historic Places Project, a collaboration with the city's Office of Historic Resources. And in so many ways, this project connects to the recommendations in the past due report. You may know it's an ambitious effort to identify, protect, and celebrate African American heritage in our city that has too often been erased. And I think it echoes the working group's advice to draw on community-based knowledge and to make sure that preservation policies and practices don't perpetuate systemic racism. The Institute on California in the West took a really important step in sharing the working group's report with the public. And it gives us all a glimpse into the group's really equitable processes and thinking and their collective wisdom to invite in dialogue and dissent. And in this way, it helps all of us understand that the project of civic memory isn't a fixed endpoint, but it's really an ongoing creative act. And we feel privileged to have been able to support this, and we hope to be part of this collaboration moving forward. Kudos to Christopher and the entire team on the report, to the Institute for making it widely available, and to the Mayor's Office for supporting this and making it possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. And before I hand it back to the Mayor for closing remarks, I want to offer thanks in two ways. First, to the members of the working group who are here, who we haven't heard from, but many of them are in attendance. I see all of you. I just want to thank all of you for the work that you did across these 18 months to produce this report across a very unpredictable and challenging year, as we've all heard. So I just want to express my thanks to all of you and all the speakers we've heard from this morning. And then specific thanks to the Mayor for convening this group, for encouraging me to bring this group together, and for your leadership and support across that difficult period in all sorts of ways, not just limited to the work of civic memory, of course. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Christopher. You know, the years tell us things the days can't see. And one of my mandatory moments of reflection each year is when I have to fulfill the charter's requirement that I give a state of the city each year. This coming Monday will be the time I fulfill that responsibility. But it's all like a college admissions essay. It's a moment when you kind of have to just stop and punctuate and think about your life, think about your surroundings, and in this case, really think about our city. And like I said at the beginning, this is a year we will sift through for years to come. And yet this moment, this kind of imperfect paradise and the horror and the beauty of this moment too that we feel is a moment, I think, where we will come out of this pandemic hungry, not just for connection, not just for celebration, but also for progress and for justice. And what you are doing is giving people, again, not the blueprint, but a methodology for how we can reconnect with this moment, reconnect with this place, reconnect with time and with history. And that chaos that we feel as human beings, where do we belong and where do we come from, to try to at least put a focus on those two axes and to let people know that Los Angeles must be a place we continue to build of belonging. And we build that from our knowledge over time of what this place has been and imagining what it can be. So I thank you for the way that you have bravely put that in the ground, or unearthed it from the ground, as it were, to be able to take this moment with beautiful design, with beautiful intent, with beautiful history, with painful and celebratory words, but most importantly, just as a policymaker, for the concrete things that you have asked, whether it is a land use policy and an apology to our Native brothers and sisters that are here, whether it's the way that communities can come together to memorialize, whether it's the emergence of what may be small plaques but deserve much bigger than that, so that people stop and can see and understand 1871, or know who Biddy Mason is, or who can walk through and see themselves, or maybe not see themselves but understand themselves by seeing others. That to me would be the most beautiful kind of outcome of this. And I assure you that as long as I'm here, and certainly when I pass the baton to my successor, to her or to him, that we want to embed this work, embed that in the budgetary work that we do, embed that in the creative work that we do, embed it in the public space work that we do, from public works to our libraries and our parks, and to find a way where history doesn't hide in Los Angeles anymore, but where history surrounds us and informs us and inspires us. And if we do that, that will be, I think, not only giving us our past due, but fulfilling something that is long past due. So thank you all for the great work.